Facebook. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Ari Gronich, the performance therapist, and Tim Pedersen, Dadbod Warrior.
Hey, everybody.
So let's talk about boosting immune system naturally and avoiding the pre-existing conditions that many of the people who are suffering have had. So give
Right.
me kind of like the first few things, the first two or three things that you would suggest.
The first thing is just is eating healthy and eating clean, natural, whole foods. And that's going to be my answer to anything. That's going to be the start and the basis for anything and everything if you want to improve your health and want to gain control of your health. So what's happened for the past 30, 40, 50 years is we have become a society of eating this packaged and processed food. And as that technology increased very rapidly, our bodies take a little bit more time to adapt to those things. And our body is made to protect itself. Our body is made to heal itself, and our body always wants to win. And what it's going to do is, in that protection of itself, it becomes inflamed. That's like one of the first defenses, is that inflammation, because it's sending the warriors to deal with this foreign object that's in your body. So imagine vitamins. We have vitamins that we're taking that are synthetic, and we're not actually able to break them down and use them in the ways that our body needs to and how we think we're going to be able to. And the problem with that is that they've created that environment where they can't possibly battle something simple like a cold.
Right. So, we could talk about like low level symptom versus high level symptom. But inflammation has been addressed as the number one first response cycle in any disease, whether it's autoimmune disease or diabetes or even Alzheimer's. They're now saying Alzheimer's is like type 3 diabetes, and it's really related to inflammation in the brain. And then the protective mechanism is to cover up the inflammation, and that's called the plaque that you see in the MRIs. So, getting your body out of inflammation is one of the key areas. Now, you say whole foods, right? But somebody might go and get a thing of bread and it says whole grain on it. So we kind of got to be a little more specific, because a lot of people don't understand. They're eating an apple and it's covered in, say, wax and pesticide, right? And they're thinking, I'm eating a whole food.
Yeah.
But as some, because of runoff and mineral depletion, you need to eat about 8 to 9 apples to equal what one apple would have equaled, right, 50 years ago. So let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit more about the details of what is a whole food and what is a whole vitamin versus a synthetic, and why is that so important to know the difference between the two.
The first thing is, just like the internet, don't read and believe don't believe everything you read on the internet. You can't believe everything you read on a package. And unfortunately, there's huge lobbying companies and systems that are battling every day to get things passed and them to be able to say certain things that just really aren't true. So you can read and see the natural and organic, say, on a box of cereal, and I'll read the ingredients, and there's literally 5 different kinds of sugar, which is scary, because that's not what we should be giving someone in the morning for breakfast and then sending them off to school. Well, in the olden days, right? And expecting them to have an attention span longer than 5 minutes.
Yes.
So you want to look for those organic vegetables. And what are the ingredients in, what's the ingredients in kale? Kale. Okay, it's kale. There's nothing else in it.
Right.
So looking for things, if you are, as you venture farther and further into the store, looking for those items, if they're jarred or canned, that have fewer ingredients. you don't want that list of all these additives and all these things and nutrients and enriched and all these things. You want it to be as pure as possible. And if you can't pronounce it, you probably shouldn't be eating it. And the longer the shelf life, the shorter your life.
Right. So we can actually, like I've done keto with intermittent fasting, which is how I lost 140 pounds.
Whew.
And so, this is coming from somebody who's had autoimmune disease for my entire life, pituitary tumor at least since I was 7, when I was told by doctors I would never lose weight. I would gain weight until I was dead from it. So let's talk about that with the kids in regards to things like ADD, ADHD, and the diets that we're on that's kind of promoting it. And what were kids like 50 years ago? Because if I look back, and I'm not quite that old, but I'm close enough that I can look back and see, we did a lot of activity. We were always moving. We were always outside and about, getting sunlight, getting vitamin D.
And that was the beginning of the downfall. I mean, that was really like when you look at the demographic, the graphs and all the statistics, there was a lot happening then. There was, fat was being taken out of food, sugar was being put in, glyphosate was, being used on crops. Like all these things were happening that like became this perfect storm of, starting to kill us basically, or create the bad environment that we kind of have now.
Right. So let's link it back then to COVID and building immune response so that we, even if get it, are asymptomatic or at least have the low levels of symptoms. What can we, what else can we do for this particular issue at this particular time?
There are more specific things like, they're saying vitamin C and zinc, which for me have always been a frontline defense thing through a cold and flu season. So if you look at it like, what have we been doing for cold and flu? And if you're someone who does not get cold and flu, what are the things that you do that help protect you from that? So they're saying that the zinc is very effective in helping in that. And I guess with like some of these antiviral things that they're trying, the zinc is part of that that cure and that process to help along the way.
Right. So I'll just kind of go to what's been talked about a lot. The hydroxychloroquine is made from quinine, which has been used as an anti-malarial drug for about 400 years before it was a drug. And quinine, its effects is to open up cell walls and allow things to get in and pass through. And then zinc is an antiviral. It's a known antiviral. That's what Z-Pak, in traditional medicine is part of. Zinc is part of a Z-Pak. Now, here's the funny thing. If you go out in the sunlight as naked as you can be, right, for 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to get 10,000 IU of vitamin D from the sun. But just as a way of thinking about it, so if you're isolated in your house, socially isolating, and you're not getting out into the sun for at least 15 to 20 minutes a day, you're really helping to compromise your immune system versus helping to enhance it, right?
Exactly. So back in the pandemic flu of, was it 1918 through 20, what they were doing was bringing patients, they were setting up these camps. Basically, they would bring the patients out into the sun, and like that was helping them tremendously. So I mean, there is, I don't know if you call that scientific or anecdotal, but that's part of and can be part of the process of helping your body be able to defend these things.
And I just want to, there's a study that was done in Germany. They tested the population of this town for COVID. And they found that over 15% of the population had COVID. None of them were symptomatic. None of them had experienced any symptoms of the illness whatsoever. And so that's really more the issue is, can we get these things? Because we can't avoid life, right? We're not going to avoid bacteria. We're not going to avoid viruses. We're not going to avoid getting parasites and so on and so forth. When we get them, how can we develop an immune system that's strong enough to do its job, which is to fight off those things, that has enough nutrients in our system, that we have enough of the things that make up. And sugar happens to be something that blocks your immune system. It causes inflammation, especially in the quantities that we tend to put it in processed foods. And same thing with going out in the sun, boosts your vitamin D amazingly well. Vitamin D isn't in and of itself an immunity to a virus. It's just something that helps your immune system become more strong and able to protect you from these kinds of responses. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're clear. Nobody's talking about creating an immunity, because the only immunity is to get the virus and fight it off and develop the antibodies.
All we can do, and there's a level of feeling hopeless through all this. Like, what the hell can we do? I'm sitting at home. There's nothing that I can do. Yes, there is. Build up that immune system. Don't stress yourself out about something that you don't have any control over. Get sleep. Just create that environment in your body that it can fight these things. And I feel so bad for these healthcare workers, because they are being stressed out. They're being overworked. They're not getting sleep. And they are getting this because they're strong, healthy people, but we're putting them in a situation, not only facing that COVID and the virus, but we're reducing their immune responsibility in their body to the point that they're getting this and having issues with it.
What are some basic things that we can do to make sure that our healthcare workers are really getting the care they need, and making sure that the system isn't overrunning them? Like, I was watching Z-Dog MD, and I don't agree with everything he says, and I agree with some of the things he says. But what he did say in this one video is, we're finding out, because we're not doing all of the elective procedures, how much we're actually taking people's lives, because the medical death toll has dropped significantly.
Wow.
And he, it was an interesting comment, but he said, when this all flushes out, we'll really start to be able to study how our medical system and over treatments have been causing more damage than they've helped. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And first, hats off to our healthcare workers, especially right now, because they are on the front lines in the battleground, however, whatever phrase you want to use. My feeling is that it's not really a healthcare system, it's a medical or medicine care system. They are trained in medicine, and they know so much, with chemistry and how these things work, and all the different medicines that are constantly coming out, and all the side effects. I mean, the side effects for what most medicines do are longer than the things that they're helping. And, it's a quagmire. It's how can anyone, I guess now they're using the computers to help with all that, but they still have to have a baseline knowledge of how these things are all working together.
Absolutely. So, and my recommendation to everybody, because as a trained functional medicine consultant, we always used to say, test, test, test. Otherwise, it's like throwing darts at a dartboard. And, for me, I'm gluten intolerant and nightshade intolerant, which a lot of people are nightshade intolerant, or at least they might have a response, an immune response to nightshades. So like peanuts are lentils, which are nightshades. They're poisonous. They have a low level immune response to most everybody, and a high level immune response to a few, right? And the benefit is that nowadays you can actually get those tests. 5-10 years ago, it was almost impossible to get them. They weren't readily available. Nobody knew about them. But nowadays it's much more prolific. That is really a great addition to the conversation, because not eating things that are genetically and in your body causing an inflammation response or an inflammatory response is going to, by its nature, boost your immune system as well, fighting off the symptoms of COVID, which is what we're kind of talking about. And I really appreciate, Tim, that we're having this conversation. It's going around kind of a, you know, in a roundabout way, because we're talking about COVID, but we're really just talking about boosting health naturally, and exercise, nutrition, getting out in the sun, taking supplements that are high quality, and really breathing deep, you know, getting enough oxygen and carbon and so forth for your lungs to be able to function into your diaphragm and out. Those are all really amazing ways to naturally boost your immune system, calm down your nervous system and stress responses, cut cortisol levels, boost HGH, which increases sleep, right? So
it's amazing
chain.
once you start that, like what those benefits are. And again, that's what I love about, you know, working and doing what I do, is that it does become this this response, like this chain response, like these things keep happening there. And my clients are more and more amazed, like, wow, I feel great, and I'm not hungry, and I'm losing weight, and like I'm sleeping better. Like all these things keep happening, and it's amazing. Your body does want to help you out. And again, guys, you know, everyone watching, this probably will not be the last time we're faced with something like this. You know, I've always heard like you know, it's going to be the quote unquote common cold that takes us all out. And here we are. This is something that's, you know, more cold-like in our lungs, and look what it's done to us. And we never, like no one in a million years, or at least in our lifetimes, would have ever anticipated something like this, where we've completely shut down, we're completely quarantined in our own homes. Like this is, and it's worldwide.
Right.
You know, we live on the East Coast, so we've dealt with hurricanes and we've dealt with localized issues, and you know, we get flooded out, and like no one understands what we're dealing with because they didn't deal with a hurricane, or someone has a tornado. No one else understands it, but like the whole, you know, the whole world is going through this, and it's like so odd that that's happening, and that we all can experience that. You know, good and bad. There's a lot of there is some positive coming out of it as well, which is amazing to see people, you know, get that mindset.
And so with that, do you have any final words? How can people get a hold of you if they are interested in talking to you further?
Call me. Yeah, so I am on Instagram at Dadbod Warrior, if you're one of those IGers. I'm on Facebook at Dadbod Warrior. And so I know branding. So my website is dadbodwarrior.com. So any of those places will find me. Tim at dadbodwarrior.com is also a way to find me via email. So I'll leave it with that. And this has been amazing, Ari. I think we should do this often. I've had fun, and your expertise and wisdom is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you so much for coming on. I know this was, you know, a last minute thing, so I appreciate you being available and scheduling it. And if you'd like to know more about how you may be able to activate yourself to become a warrior, as Tim has, for
Awesome.
whatever your passion is, one of my favorite sayings is, "We made this shit all up, and we can make it up however we want." So
Yep.
you don't have to accept it for what it is. We can create it differently because we made it up to begin with. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. And I hope to hear from you guys soon. If there's any other questions, we'll be available to answer them on the comment bar.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Ari.
much.